Hello. Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, a show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is, how do you get there?
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm. Don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Hey, here we are again, folks.
Happy to be here.
Fantastic. And because of that awesome audio test that we did earlier, we're pretty sure you can hear us and hear the music, and you'll soon be able to hear our special guest this week, Roben White. Dark, do you have a little intro prepared for our friend?
An intro prepared. Actually,
You seem like the guy to do the intros.
I'm right now in the process of sharing this to my page so I can get up to speed with our little story here.
Fantastic. Folks, you may be watching us on Facebook, you may be watching us on YouTube, or you may be watching us on twitch.tv. Either way, thank you so much for joining. And
we have a giant salad between us today.
yeah, this is blocking all of our the crapola and the cords and everything on the table. So
Last week it was more opaque.
The chat was more opaque.
Yeah.
Well, and now that we have a guest, you're going to be seeing the table in all of its glory because the chat window is moving. And so let's switch over to Roben, and maybe he can introduce himself.
Yeah, we're really excited to have a guest today. This is
we have all the technology, and it's thanks to you guys.
New studio, and we're trying out new technology. And our guest, Roben White, has agreed to be a guinea pig to see if we can make the technology work.
Much like when I started the Jolly Roger radio show, I knew I had to bring in a veteran Zoomer.
Oh, right.
And Roben is a self-proclaimed expert Zoomer, and so we don't have to worry about him sitting with a window behind him so his face is all blacked out like some spy movie. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, Roben, and welcome to Post-Orthodoxy. I feel like
thank you.
I feel like way more official saying that.
I like the first lie is that I'm a self-proclaimed Zoom expert, but that's all right.
I mean, that's what I heard through the grapevine.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, you lie and I'll swear to it.
There we go.
All right.
That's teamwork right there.
Absolutely.
So, but really, it is nice to have somebody who knows how to use good sound and good picture so that, because we've worked really hard to set up all this equipment in here so that our audience has a quality experience and they can hear what we're talking about and they can participate and not just be like, I'm bored, swipe away.
Right.
Yeah.
We're glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a tough gig doing this stuff.
Well, it's a tough gig explaining to folks who you are because you do a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. So I wanted
what
to...
What do you do?
Yeah, I wanted to get... maybe you can give us an idea of what your current projects are.
We'll pass that chore on to you. What do you do?
Working on, and then we want to get into some Q&A in a moment. I don't know if you heard much of our show on Monday, but I think Ainsley has some questions. Let's talk about the gap between the story of America as taught in public school to regular folk like myself. And and then the lived experience of some other folks.
Right.
It looks like our live video has been interrupted, but we're not. We may be coming back soon. I guess. Here we go.
Well, and you act as though the public school experience is the experience of everybody in the U.S.
A large number of people, sure.
Probably last time I looked at statistics in 2014, it's 35% of kids are homeschooled.
35%?
It's a pretty big percentage of kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're okay.
And not all of them are in religious homeschools.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. So anyway, I was told a different story about who was living on this land before the Pilgrims came than what is reality. And didn't really know until a few years ago.
Well, I don't think we all know that reality as well as we should. And I do some work with the Native Caucus of Washington and doing some work in Oregon as well, helping get, we got legislation passed that,
Pardon me one moment. You keep going.
Okay.
that is called Since Time Immemorial. And it is legislation that requires that Native history be taught in the school systems. And that's a huge step forward.
Is that happening right now?
It's happening in Washington and in Oregon, and actually it's happening in a couple other places too, but particularly in Washington and Oregon. And the tribes in the areas get to decide what that curriculum is for their areas. So we're helping through WSU, Washington State University at Vancouver, Shamim Rocca in particular. Dr. Rocca is just an extraordinary human being.
Time for post.
Hold on. We're having a...
Sorry.
Okay.
Technical difficulties.
And Dr. Rocca is doing a great job as well on helping get that curriculum written. And, you know, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to get started. We're also kind of trying to teach the teachers and that are the students that are becoming teachers in the Teachers College to be culturally effective and to know a little bit about this before they get out and teach it, and then trying to make sure that the curriculums fit whatever system that the teachers in the school systems are using. So you know, that's a big deal, and it's a huge leap forward, and I think it'll be starting to change things. You know, even in higher education, there is an extraordinary lack of knowledge about Natives'
actual history
and history, and certainly even in the law schools, there's almost nothing about this type of treaty law, and it's the highest law in the land. So,
as in highest, stuff. As in the earliest.
Robin's doing that thing where he's clicking the pen.
Oh, are you clicking a pen?
I'm just seeing if you guys are noticing.
Yeah.
Keep it. He's.
I told Dark earlier, don't be doing stuff like that this time.
Right. So he's just testing me.
I'm just testing you.
So was there a major, like, were you able to see a major gap between this new curriculum that where you're saying Washington and Oregon, this new curriculum that is teaching about the First Peoples, and like, is there a massive difference between the way the textbooks were recently and what's being done now?
Oh my God. I couldn't even explain to you how colonial whitewashing is just prevalent in all of the curriculum. And that's even in higher education. And I'm not saying that there isn't some good Native curriculum in some schools, in some universities, but it's few and far between, and it's something that really needs to be worked on. And we're certainly, one of the things I'm trying to do is try and escalate the amount of curriculum and the opportunities for Natives to teach it and for Natives to learn it, because even a lot of Native people really don't know the full history and value of their history, because a lot of these kids, you know, for years and years, kids were taken at 5 or 6 years old, taken out of the family, taken thousands of miles away or whatever, and dropped in these schools, and a lot of them didn't make it back. Or either they died or they were just dropped into a city somewhere. You know, during the 50s, late 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was an effort to try and dissolve all the tribes. And they took these people and dropped them into cities thousands of miles away and said,
what do you mean effort to dissolve the tribes? What
they
does
wanted
that mean?
to actually dissolve all the tribes, to abrogate the treaties, dissolve the tribes.
Oh, wow.
And integrate
the U.S. government
Natives
was
into
trying
society.
to.
Yeah, which has been their primary goal, is either
integration.
Right, because there was actually at one time the United States government, their policy was extermination,
right.
kill all the Indians.
That was the governmental policy.
Correct. And, even to this day, a lot of that genocidal stuff is built into the institutions and into our government and into our society. So that continues to this day. And, we really need to turn that around. One way we do that is by doing history.
In the educating in the schools, in the public schools. What was your education like growing up? I mean, what were your surroundings like, and what kind of education were you getting about your own history as you were growing up?
Well, when I made it to school, which sometimes was spotty, I went to a lot of different schools.
Because you moved a lot?
Yes. And it was a horror show. Absolute horror show. I didn't get along well there at all. Number one, culturally, we were very different people. And there was a lot of race problems.
Between
once they find out you're Indian, or when they saw my dad or something, then, things changed dramatically. When he'd come to school or something, things would change. But I was really well educated at home. My father actually got a degree. He was a teacher and a vice principal, actually in Portland Public Schools for a while. But they were really sticklers about English language. Not that I speak well now, but at one time I could actually speak English very well. Because they were, they spoke Lakota and they spoke English, and my father and my aunt and so on were directed to go into the world and learn the white man's ways and to help their Indian people. That was their job. That was their directive to do, and they did that. But I got into a lot of arguments with teachers because it was wrong. The stuff they were saying was just bullshit. When you call them on it, they don't like that.
Right.
And even if you call them on it nicely, from then on you're done. So it was just that constant example of that. And
done as in like a kid that gets known for being a troublemaker in first grade is always sort of thought of as a troublemaker, sort of done.
Well, yeah, and then of course I kept arguing.
Right.
So,
this train ain't stopping.
Well, yeah, it just gets to a point where you really need to do this, and I haven't stopped yet. I come by that honestly, though. With my dad wrote a lot of legislation and helped write legislation and did a lot of stuff to really, particularly for natives. And my aunt, of course, was the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians for almost 10 years and assistant to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and I'm sure the first woman, and if not the first person to be in Denver, the mayor's head of the Mayor's Commission on human rights and community relations and so on and so forth. So, like
Native Affairs specifically?
No, everybody, just across the board.
Oh wow!
Yeah, which is really big, and she traveled the world doing a lot of that kind of thing.
So it sounds like you're living, continuing on the family story with the work that you do. Well,
yeah, and I think culturally we kind of do that anyway. I mean, I can't remember being an activist, not doing things for our people, because you just did that. I mean, whether it was cleaning up after an event or during an event or serving elders or doing a class or doing a play or something, you did it. You didn't.
So if you
weren't necessarily asked,
right?
But
right.
you didn't even think about not doing it either.
If you were raised, I had to jump away for the part of the conversation where we talked about you in your early schooling, I think, because
Right.
the dogs were barking. Were you raised knowing the more historical story about first people in the U.S.?
Well, absolutely, because of my aunt's work and my father's work.
And your father, right?
You know, we had a constant stream of Indians from all over the country and indigenous people from all over the world, and
Gotcha.
politicians and entertainers and really famous people, and which is kind of early on I just realized that people were all the same, and that we had bodily functions and wear
Right.
pants and stuff, and that and that some of them that thought they were really big stuff really weren't. And
Still wear pants and go to the bathroom.
yeah, so my ideals are a little different than other people's, and I think more on a level. I think part of my education, though, has not just been in school. I think, of course, I was well read from the time we didn't have TV and stuff where I lived in, but we did have a lot of books. And,
Would you be so kind as to tell me what, is it appropriate to say tribes?
Yeah.
Like, I really don't know.
So that's
Teach
so
me.
so yeah.
Is it okay to ask you what tribes you're from, and is tribes the right
absolutely,
word?
Sure it is.
Right.
Sure it is.
As people who, for a lot of people who have not had exposure, I think a lot of people are afraid to ask questions about other cultures, any culture, any lifestyle. A lot of people are afraid to ask questions because it exposes their ignorance. Ainsley doesn't have that filter. She's not afraid to ask questions of things that she doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the charm of the show, is that a lot of people would like to know things, but they're afraid to ask the questions.
Well,
certainly, I'm not. I have no problem with people asking questions, particularly if they're trying to learn something.
Yes.
If they're not trying to be an ass, that's if you're asking questions, you're trying to learn something, and I appreciate that. And I don't care if you make mistakes.
Some people do ask questions manipulatively, though, which is something
and
a lot of our
and I'll take them to task. But
right, if you can tell.
But if you're even making a mistake, if you're trying, you're going to make mistakes, and I'm not going to down you for that. If you're making mistakes intentionally, I will. But
right.
But if you're making mistakes because you're trying to do the right thing, I'm just going to try and help you do the right thing. I'm not going to, castigate or punish you for doing something to try and better.
Don't you feel like people should know these things by now?
Well, yes. However, I also know the realities of it. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm Cheyenne and Lakota. Oglala Lakota. I'm enrolled. My enrollment tribe is the Oglala Sioux tribe.
You're only allowed to pick one.
You can only have one.
Mm.
Doesn't matter your.
Right. If you have a card, you have a CDIB card?
Yes. I
right.
do.
So you can only have one of those cards.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
What a weird sense of belonging and non-belonging.
Theoretically, you can change. You could give one up and apply for another.
Huh.
However, I wouldn't go through that.
Yeah, CDIB.
It's really hard for a lot of people to get their tribal cards. Sometimes for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes the enrollment isn't open for a particular tribe all the time. It's not like it's open all the time. If your parents don't enroll you, then you have to enroll later. But it may be once every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever. Then you also have to have all the documentation, which is really hard in Indian country because of economy and of records crazily disappearing and stuff, federal records, and particularly when judges tell the federals that they owe us money. then there's fires and floods everywhere. And
right.
Suddenly you don't have records.
Yeah, it's weird how that works. It's
weird.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah.
But there's so many reasons why it's really difficult for, and their parents have hidden out. They're when people are trying to kill you all the time or take advantage of you, then you hide away and you become a Mexican or a Asian,
Italian,
or whatever the hell you can get away with.
Right.
So, we're trying to get our people back. We're trying to, and we don't, we don't. Blood quantum isn't something that we came up with.
Right.
That was a thing of the colonizers and
what quantum?
Blood quantum. So
in other words,
the CDIB card is a certificate of degree of Indian blood.
Oh, okay.
So then you have to have how much blood makes you able to have a card.
Right.
Right.
Because it's specifically
which is different from tribe to tribe too.
Yeah. Oh, weird.
Well, we're trying to get away from that and do it completely lineal. So
what does that mean?
In other words, who you're lineage, who you're related to.
Yeah.
And that passed out because we just don't believe that. We've always believed that, a drop of Cheyenne blood makes you a Cheyenne. Even as evidence that we considered Custer one of our relatives, even though he raped one of our women and had a child from that.
And it doesn't make you mad to think that people would try to self-identify with being Native and not, like, quote unquote deserve it? Like a lot of people.
Does it make me mad?
Well,
no.
That's a very reductive question.
Well, the Elizabeth Warren case is one of those stories that got all over the news, where Elizabeth Warren claimed to be Cherokee, have Cherokee blood. She came from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so she has some Cherokee blood. And then everybody said, yeah, you can't claim that because you haven't lived the experience.
You have not.
That's bullshit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, what is your perspective? Because we can't really we can have opinions, but we want to hear your opinion.
If you're blood, you're blood. And whether you've lived the experience or not is another thing. You can be a white Indian, I suppose. There's a lot of things you can be, but a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to the social elements, the cultural elements, and the ceremony that become part of that. But that doesn't mean that I think that she should, take some time and go to Oklahoma and become familiar with her culture and her. We just went through a litany of people that aren't, that haven't grown up around that.
Right.
That were maybe, or maybe did go to the cities and still do some of their culture. There's a vibrant Native culture here in the Portland area. It's about the 7th largest Native community in the country. And we've had stuff been going on here for decades and decades and decades that are organizations. But there's 80% of us live off of our reservations. And
outside of the reservations.
Outside of the reservations. And most of those weren't from their own volition. Most of those were economic refugees, religious refugees. We weren't really legally allowed to practice our religion until the 80s, 1980s, not the 1880s, but the 1980s.
Wow.
We were dumped in these cities. There's nothing there. If you're going to eat and you have to send money, I send money back to the reservations. My reservations, like the us in Standing Rock, are the poorest places in the North America. 90% unemployment. Kids as young as 6 committing suicide. We're dying of stuff people stopped dying of 80, 90 years ago. We're the most likely to be murdered, most likely to be arrested, most likely to be incarcerated. We're number one in a lot of things we don't want to be number one in. And, it's just a lot of people die every year of freezing death or malnutrition or whatever. Diabetes in particular is a horrid, rampant thing. So, we want people back. We want our people back. So, just because you don't know how to be an Indian, well, it's really hard to be an Indian.
Yeah.
Even if you are a traditional, what we call a traditional Indian, it's not an easy thing to be in this day and age. And so you're going to see the spectrum of where people are in that relationship with their culture and their identity. And again, like I said, a lot of people are just afraid to even say it.
So you're saying you feel as though, speaking from your position in the Native community, that the Native community is actually very inclusive or wants to be inclusive, and isn't like purist, that the Native community like wants to, I don't even know how to say it. Like,
well, the community is also diversified. There's many different tribes and there's many different communities within the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's different outlooks in those situations. I mean, there's been, Christianity has, altered so much of what it is to be Indians.
Yeah.
In my view, not in a good way, which pisses some of my relatives off because they are, and even my aunt was, really big in the Episcopal Church, and we have relatives who are priests, and
even though the church was very instrumental in stripping you guys of your culture.
Absolutely.
Crazy.
Yeah.
How do you rectify that? I mean, I have similar.
I don't.
There being natives who loved being Christian still.
Well, that was something that was kind of shocking for me. A little bit about my background and my past. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian cult that was basically, it was at its core white supremacist. You could only be a real person if you were descended from the British Empire. We ended up getting our CDIB card in the 80s. My dad went through the work to do all the paperwork to make sure that he had his card because he suddenly found out he could get a tax break on his business by being a minority business owner. Yes. And we were Cherokee and Choctaw, and he chose the Choctaw because of their Christian roots. I had a newspaper. I subscribed to the Choctaw tribal newspaper, the Bishnik, and they have births, deaths, and news of the tribe, the casinos that are going up in Oklahoma, and the casinos seem to have done an amazing thing for the benefit of the community in Oklahoma in terms of financially building their communities and infrastructure, hospitals and schools. But when I read the paper, the chaplain's corner was a hellfire and brimstone fundamentalist Christian guy named Bertram Bobb, and it was basically Southern Baptist rhetoric. And at one point, I called up
Bertram Bobb.
I called up the newspaper and said, "What is with Bertram Bobb being our shaman? Why is Bertram Bobb the holy man for the entire Choctaw Nation?" And she said, "Well, we've always been Christian." And I thought, what are you talking about? And then I went to Wikipedia and found out it was true. That the Choctaw tribe was it was from some sort of diaspora that happened in the West, where a bunch of people from various tribes ended up in the Gulf of Mexico, and the French got them and converted them to Christianity. And the Choctaw tribe originated around a Christian identity. That's according to Wikipedia.
That's not always.
No, but not always. Well, the name Choctaw.
But for a long time, yes.
But for a long time. So they consider themselves one of the 5. That's why we have the 5 civilized tribes, what they call the 5 civilized tribes. And they're one of them because they're Christian, right? So that to me is one of those stories where I have a CDIB card. I am a registered member of the Choctaw tribe. But I find very little to connect with my own tribe because of the Christian identity. Because I had also a sort of negative experience in the Christian identity.
Well, certainly you don't have to be a Christian to be a native. And
right.
I'm not just because I'm not a Christian doesn't mean that I'm against Christianity or people being Christian. I don't really, I don't follow it. I don't believe in it, but you can certainly be a good human being and be a Christian.
Yeah.
And you can follow the
hashtag not all Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I say all the time, because we do a lot of evaluation of our experiences growing up in kinds of Christianity that were largely harmful. And I always want to be like, but I've met lots of other Christians since then that are actually like Jesus.
Yeah.
So hashtag not all Christians.
Well, and I think that you can be, you can have a native spirituality and probably still be a Christian too.
Really?
I think that's possible.
It depends on what kind of Christianity and
what kind of native spirituality.
What kind of yeah, sure.
Huh.
I mean, I think there's some core values that run through both.
I don't even know that I don't even think you have to substitute. I think there's the possibility of that.
Huh.
But it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because there's so many other important issues to deal with that the presence of Christianity is not something that I spend a lot of time dealing with, other than when do bad things and then I have to try and
when they come to save you.
Yeah, they gave that up for quite some time.
That's why he moved to the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think that religion is, certainly doesn't make or break an Indian. I just don't buy it.
Huh.
That's all
Okay.
right.
When you and I met, we connected about some of the time that we had both spent on the Standing Rock Reservation around the time of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I wanted to get some perspective from you on what that experience was like for you and what you saw happen there, and maybe help me understand some of the things that were going on. I have my perspective about what was happening. One thing that I thought was really striking is when we first ended up at the Ochedi-Sakowin camp, we were immediately taken into a tent and given an orientation. And to me, and this is just me this is my perception of what was going on, it was there to make sure that super well-meaning, woke white activists didn't come in and start train wrecking a prayer camp. Because I think a lot of people had an idea of what they were coming to do, which is save the environment. And when they got there, people were not talking about saving the environment, because my perception is that the environment is not separate from us, where a lot of people see the environment as this thing over there and I'm over here, so I'm going to go over there and save the environment. And so I was really struck by the orientation to get people. I don't think people realized they were going to another, deeply another culture, like going to another country when they showed up on the reservation. And it was interesting to watch people have to make that adjustment from whatever motivated them to come, to adjust to be in support of the prayer camp that was there. And it wasn't just a protest movement. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience was like while you were there?
Well, sure. I think you have to frame this in I think white people in general are really have been subjected to this Judeo-Christian attitude and the papal bull of dominion, and that man has dominion over the earth, and that it's just to do whatever he wishes to do with it, and that he is more powerful than anything, and higher than anything, and
all the things on the planet, and then God made humans special and different and separate.
Yeah, which
is the story.
Which even if let's say even if that's true, then you would even your responsibility to that should be even more, because he made you special.
Well, to be stewards.
Absolutely.
Right.
Then the onus is on you even more than it would be otherwise.
Taking dominion is a little different than being stewards. Like taking dominion is like God made the earth for your use.
Well, I guess it depends on which Bible you're reading.
Well, I mean, it's the Bible does say things like, don't muzzle the ox while it's grinding the grain. Like this animal exists for you to get what you need out of the planet, which is food, but don't be a dick while you do it. Let him eat while he's also running the mill and grinding the grain, And so it's like, or like things like the Bible would say, like, don't, if your animals haven't eaten, you shouldn't be eating, that sort of thing. And so, but at the same time, it was like, look, here's the ground, here are the plants, here are the fish. The fish in the water are yours. The animals on the land are yours. The plant in the ground are yours. It's all yours. Have it.
Yeah, there was no don't shit in your water or your backyard.
Yeah, there was no really conservation education.
So, I mean, that's that responsibility. But as far as the camp goes, for me, it was extraordinary because for 100 and some years, the separate parts of the Great Sioux Nation had not been allowed to be together. Anytime we got too many folks together, they sent in the army and killed 200-300 of us. So for that reason, for representatives and peoples of all of those tribes to be together on Sioux land, on unceded territory, was extraordinary and historical and very spiritual and meaningful to me. But I've also been a labor leader and human rights activist and Native activist and environmental justice activist, and talking about Dark was saying how all this stuff came together. Well, yeah, it definitely came together.
That's a lot of
but it was a peaceful, prayerful gathering of human beings to learn and to try and change the path of humanity in their relationship with Unchimaka, Mother Earth.
There was a lot going on.
Grandmother Earth, to be Grandmother
Earth. When I was there, I was really, I think we got there in November sometime the first time that I went. It was the week before the incident happened at Backwater Bridge. And it felt like the village that I was in, because it was a village that had sprung from a floodplain. There were suddenly pathways and roads and neighborhoods and different groups who had found themselves in different areas. And it felt like a very well-established village where the food was taken care of, the litter was taken care of, people were watching out for each other. There was, in Hawaii, what they call the coconut wireless, because the cell phones were not always available. Word got around camp quickly, and not always clearly, but word did get around camp. Whenever something important was happening, everybody instantly knew about it. And I had a sense of like an ancient experience of being in that, even though there were people who whose families had been on that land for 10,000 years, there were people coming from all over, from Hawaii, from Norway, from people who were coming from all over the planet, and it just settled into this powerful sense of a village feeling. And it was really striking to have that experience. It was not, I've been involved in a lot of, I guess you would call protests or social activism in my past. And it was nothing like that when I got there. It was the sense of a prayer camp, the sense of people connecting, getting to know each other, communicating. I could see the rivalries. I could see some of the tribal rivalries. I could see some of the resistance to the social activists that were maybe a little too zealous in their effort. Some people who seemed to act like they were at Burning Man, that it was a party. But it was fairly calm and kind. And I didn't see a lot of conflict until what happened on the bridge the night before we left with the sheriff's department. But that sense was really encouraging to me. There were so many different people that had come together and tribes that had probably never met before, because these were tribes not just from the continental United States. These were tribes from all over the world who were concerned about the issue at hand.
Yeah, and this, I can see why they brought in, missile launchers and tanks and army and private armies and so on, because this must have, this kind of thing terrifies, right? Terrifies the corporatocracy, because you got to consider that this was a training ground that taught people the ultimate way of changing other people's minds. Post-Orthodoxy.
Hashtag.
And hashtag. And that there were people from all over the world. I literally met people from all over the world. And still work with them today. But a lot of those people left that camp and then went back to wherever they were and started repeating the process. Wash, rinse, repeat.
So what is the Standing Rock fundamental ultimate way of changing our minds?
That you can do things peacefully, that you can do things together, that people are not impotent, that they aren't alone, that we are extraordinarily powerful within ourselves and as a group, as a human group. It wasn't about, some of the issues that came up and were in the media were about water and were about sovereignty issues and treaty issues. Certainly that land that the pipeline was going through, it was non-ceded land right next to the reservation that had never been ceded. And that's part of the issue, is that, that land was never given up, but white people just came and lived on it and took it.
Can you tease that out a little bit? Because I know a little bit about that from having been there and studied what was going on, but can you tease that out a little bit for people who don't understand that part of the story? What do you mean by unceded land?
So it was land, unceded land is land that the natives never gave up in treaty. They never said, this treaty, they never signed a treaty or gave that land up or sold it or traded it or anything. That was land that we should have right now. We should be living on. And if you look at this, right, even on the reservations, they're checkerboarded with white people owned land, because one of the tricks that they tried to do later was give private ownership of these allotments to natives, individual natives, and then economically or whatever force them out of that and made it able to sell to anybody.
So then you can have a transfer of land from the
to
tribe
white people.
To white people, right.
So you'll see these cities right in the middle of the reservation that are not Indian owned.
Are you familiar with what happened with the Cherokee folks in Oklahoma, where the town that I grew up in, Pryor Creek, Oklahoma, is now considered Cherokee land?
That was a big case, man.
They repatriated it. Do we call it that in the U.S.?
Well, and what does that mean? What does that mean for my folks that have a house in now Cherokee land? It's still, they have a... They can get a bank loan. They can still sell it. But what does that mean in the long term?
Probably has a lot to do with like how the federal government treats that area, right?
Well, absolutely. If you're living within that that federal reserve, that reservation area, that puts a different light of entitlement on what you can get in federal aid.
And
if you're Indian,
if it's repatriated, does it still have federal aid attached to it now?
Because it's within that boundary, I don't know that the property itself would get federal aid, but an Indian living there would now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a big.
Now, and I don't know the legal aspects of what the ownership part of that is. But I do know that, we got some money a little while ago because...
We being the Oglala?
No, Indians in general,
okay.
I should say. Sorry. Indians in general got money because the Department of Agriculture kind of screwed people of color out of monies, federal monies. And so we got a big chunk of that, but we didn't necessarily get to decide how that was spent.
Who did?
The different tribes
got,
and farmers,
right,
in particular, got this money. So part of that was put into a trust, and then, but some of that. My point is that some of that money is going to buying back some of that checkerboard property on the reservation, and that theoretically will turn into land that belongs strictly to the tribe, and that it can't be taken out of trust from the tribe.
I remember when this kind of...
And I think we should kind of talk about trust and the government trust. So a lot of lands or water or ore or timber, whatever has been in trust and handled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And they have been making the contracts, and it's kind of funny because we a lot of times never get to see the money from those things. But now that we have started expanding our economic base outside of those trust things, like if you open up a casino or where a lot of places are doing clinics, medical clinics, mental health clinics, alcohol clinics, or timber, or something, trucking companies or whatever. It's funny how all those years we couldn't apparently handle our money, but now that we're in our own businesses, even the tribal businesses, that we're doing just fine. And like in Washington, I think tribal economy is the 4th largest employer in the state. So
wow,
and that's a big deal when you're talking about Microsoft and Boeing and agriculture, because Washington State is one of the largest agricultural economies in the world. So this is not insignificant. It's a big deal. And but again, we can't get loans on stuff on the reservation. We can't.
So you can't get a loan to buy a house? No,
because
why not?
Because you can't put your house up. You can't put the land up for your house. And they're not gonna, they just, nobody in South Dakota is gonna lend an Indian money for business just because they're white bankers.
Wow. But legally, also, if you live on a reservation, you can't get a loan to buy a house?
Well, you could build a house, but you can't. It's like the way the Zulus do it. You don't own the land because that's the tribal land. Am I correct?
You can own the house.
But so you can't get a loan because you can't sell the house if it's still going to remain within tribal.
So everybody who lives, and this is just the massive amount of ignorance that I have not growing up Native. Everybody who lives on the reservation all owns the land, so nobody owns property.
That's what it was supposed to be. That's what we're trying to get it back to. There are, like I say, there are private landowners on some of those, and that's an issue. It's a big issue.
To make it not private.
Right.
I hear that what Roben's saying is that the Native push is to try to make reservations not private land.
So you can't have your own private land on the reservation, Native or not.
No, you could, the family or somebody could have, an area that their territory that they have probably had for decades and decades or whatever.
Say I get married and have a couple kids and I need to upsize to a bigger house with a yard with a fence. How do I do that as a Native on a reservation?
Well, it depends on the reservation.
Okay.
It's kind of all over the map. A lot of times you'd go to the tribal housing and you'd put in for a house. And then you'd have to be approved.
So reservations are sort of socialist? Is that the right term?
Yeah, pretty much.
So I was raised super Republican, and I lived in the middle of the Apache reservation in San Carlos for 2 years, and I lived nearby the Cherokee reservation in North Carolina for 2 years. So I have a much stronger experience of the Apache reservation than Cherokee because we only really visited Cherokee. We weren't living in the middle of it. And so with if you imagine a human is like a little castle, and as they're growing up, their castle gets made with all these stones of belief systems and perspectives. My little castle was built with the concept that private property gives you the impetus to take care of your land. It's mine, and so I take care of it. And my experience on the Apache reservation was that nobody felt any ownership over anything, even their own health and well-being, because all of it had been dictated by the federal government for so long, and they had no powers that nobody was taking care of themselves. So I guess I was sort of a mix of like Republican private property mindset and also recognizing that a lot of these trauma behaviors were because people had been stripped of their rights and sovereignty by the government. But it's still, in my mind, it's sort of, I guess that's a switch that I haven't really made yet, is like, how do people care about taking care of things if it's not your thing? And that's just a mindset that
that's a culture.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that. So on my reservation, you could apply for a house through housing. You could also slap up a house on that land you've been living on. So my family had an allotment, and
what does an allotment mean?
Well, back when they broke up the reservations into chunks and made allotments, and that's like everybody that was on the rolls. In other words, you had your name on the tribal rolls, got an allotment.
If you were there when they made the reservation, you got some land.
Yeah. This is a little bit after they made the reservation.
Does anybody try to move to reservations?
Who might?
Do other natives try to be like, I want to go live on the Cherokee because I'm Cherokee. I want to go live on Cherokee.
Well, okay.
Like now I'm thinking like they wouldn't even be able to get a house.
First of all, there's a lot of reservations that aren't just one kind of Indian.
Right.
There's the Cheyenne Arapaho. There is Grand Ronde here in Oregon is a mixture of probably, God, I can't remember, and I'm going to get beat up for forgetting how many tribes are there, but over a dozen, I'm sure, of different that were tricked from all over from Northern California on up, tricked into going up there and then put on that reservation and their land taken away from them when they were gone. But the Confederate tribes of Grand Ronde. So there's also Umatilla. There's
I've heard of Umatilla.
Or in Oklahoma, there's all sorts of Indians in Oklahoma that weren't there to begin with.
There's 70 different tribal seats in Oklahoma, I think.
Yeah. So, the same up here. There'll be, 5 or 6 different, 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 different kinds of Indians that were sent to one reservation. Quinault here was a place where that was supposed to be the Quinault thing. And then, Chinook were sent there, and Makah were sent there, and Cowlitz were sent there, and oh my God. And some of these people didn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
But
when you don't know a lot.
When you and when you're poor, it's hard to take care of things too.
Yeah. It is.
So,
and that was something that I noticed, is that the Apache reservation seemed very impoverished and had impoverished problems with, like drug abuse, teen pregnancy, suicide, people getting beat up.
Absolutely.
And Cherokee, for some reason, was not impoverished, and they had an excellent diabetes prevention program and father-child support therapy and billboards all over the place encouraging people to rise above. And
you see tribes that are becoming economically independent are the face is completely changing on those reservations.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a casino at Oglala too, but I don't know that anybody actually goes to it. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's not, that's not going to change the face of our economy. We're sitting on, I don't know, what is it, $1 billion or something in the bank because they're trying to pay us for the Black Hills.
And you're saying we're not selling
we don't
it.
want, it's not about the fucking money.
Right.
We want our land back.
Right.
It's not about the money. That is our spiritual homeland. That is it's a religious place for us.
And where is this?
The Black Hills.
The Black Hills of South Dakota.
That's where the giant crazy horse statue is being carved. That's where Mount Rushmore is.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
The graffiti of Mount Rushmore.
Sorry to be super...
Which is another place that was a reservation, and then gold miners came in and with the help of Custer and a couple of them, and then the United States came in and took that too, because and we want it back.
So
we don't want the money.
Yeah,
it's not about the money.
That's
not everything's about money.
That's the question. That's one of the topics that I really wanted to talk to you about, because I met you when we were at the premiere of the Zulu Summer movie when we were in Portland. The story
I just sort of thought we knew each other before then, but I'm realizing now that was when we met Roben.
Right.
Was in Portland.
Right.
Portland at Shamim's house.
Right. So one of the guys that came over from South Africa, from Nangoma, he's actually from the Petty tribe, but he's been working with the prince and sort of acts as an ambassador for the Zulu people. And he connected with the native story here much more than the African American story, because the Zulus are in a very similar situation to what a reservation would be here. They have a king. The king's job is to protect the heritage and to protect the land. 70% unemployment rate. Not many job opportunities because you don't have companies moving there because they can't own the land, so they're not setting up a business. So there's no.
So it just doesn't get better.
And so they really connected with. I got to introduce the Zulu nation to the Crow nation, and watch those conversations take place, and it was fascinating for me because the conversation of repatriation of lands is a live topic in South Africa. And it's not so much of a topic here. And my friend Mokai was, every time we interviewed, we did a show called Copacetic Conversations. We interviewed people across political spectrums, fundamentalists, Catholics, Republicans, Antifa. And he asked each one of them at the end of the interview, what do you think about repatriation of native lands? And it was always like you had just slapped them in the face because most people have not even considered what that would look like, much less have a feeling or an opinion on it.
Even if they like care about the native plight, they're just kind of like, well, but it just sort of sucks that that's the way it is, because obviously we would never be able to just give the continent back, right?
So what does repatriation of lands look like? I mean, what we saw in Oklahoma is some indicator that there can be some movement. But in your opinion, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the legality of all that's going to look like in Oklahoma. I haven't studied it well enough yet to really.
Yeah, I'm saying for my friends in South Africa, because they're really interested in that story. Yeah.
Do you imagine we could just give the continent back and make up for all the crap?
Well, you could. And we wouldn't probably even make you leave.
We could just move on to little white people reservations.
Kind of.
Little European colonizer reservations.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. And
imaginary world, Robin, if you could snap your fingers and do something that would fix all this mess, what would you imagine North America would look like if there was a way to enact change?
A healthier, what's the healthier vision for the future?
Like maybe snap number one would just be all the colonizers leave and all the Native Americans get their land back. But like version number two that doesn't involve uprooting, the great-great-grandkids of people that actually did the shit.
Well,
is that insensitive?
So, I should start by saying that in a way, we've been trying to do that. The Judge Bolt's decision that the Indians really did have rights to the fish.
Like we had a treaty.
Was a big deal. Mm-hmm. Legal rights, because that reinforced the fact that we are allowed to go get food in all the usual and accustomed places. So it isn't just about the fish, it's about the berries and the other things, the food and the other products that we need. And that, we can go to national forests or other places, or actually even private property to get that.
Any private property in the U.S., any native person is allowed to go and get stuff off of it?
He's talking about specifically what happened in Oregon, right?
Well, it was in Washington.
But
theoretically, that should be the way it is, yes.
Fascinating.
But, we do go on land, but there's people still get arrested for fishing by state troopers in Oregon and Washington.
Wow.
A friend of mine just got arrested the other day, or ticketed anyway. They're not arresting them so much as they are anymore.
Fine.
That's the way that we made that, is that in Washington, guys would go out and they'd fish and they'd get arrested and get beat up, and they'd go to jail, and then other guys would replace them and they'd get beat up and thrown in jail, and then they ran out of guys, so the women started going fishing and getting beat up and thrown in jail. When they ran out of that, the kids did it. And finally, a federal guy from the federal government, from the Justice Department, actually saw what was going on. He was on site one time and said, no.
No
this
more.
Can't go on. And so, it goes to say, and I think we get back to Standing Rock in a way that, treaty law is the highest law in the land. It is the top tier of law. Everything else is below it.
Like highest as in the oldest laws?
No, it's the most important, the strongest, the biggest, baddest laws in the country. If you're going from importance and from power, you start at treaty law and then you go down.
You go down to local law or federal law under treaty law.
Aren't the treaties like the thing that the U.S. government has disobeyed the most?
Yeah.
Talking ideally.
I know.
Yes.
I had no idea they were the highest law of the land, because the government disregards them all the time.
My point being is, and the reason I'm getting back to Standing Rock, is that if you look at Standing Rock and you look at in the Northwest, by the way, if you get a chance, get online. Maybe we'll try and put that on there. The thin green line is people.
I have it up. Okay. And I'll put a link in the comments.
Okay, it's important to do that, and it's a project that I'm working on with Dr. Hilligers, and it's extraordinary, and it's just really, really a groundbreaking thing. But of the almost 30 wins we've had in the Northwest against fossil fuel and the corporatocracy, the big, giant companies, largely have been through treaty and sovereignty issues. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you don't have white allies holding the United States government's feet to the fire to follow the goddamn law, then it's not going to happen. So when you start something like you did at Standing Rock, that stuff that will never ever go away. That is just getting bigger and bigger. Those people went to other places and started doing the same thing. That's who you're seeing. Have you noticed how similar a lot of these actions are that are going on all around the world and in this country?
Yes.
To Standing Rock. So it worked. It's not dead. Standing Rock is far from dead. Standing Rock, there's stuff flowing through that pipeline, but it ain't over. It certainly changed the world.
When the last time I went to the Standing Rock was the, I think it was the 22nd of February. That's when the police were given the dead drop. Everybody has to be out. And it was a mess. The snow had melted. There was mud everywhere. There are things that had been revealed under the snow when the camp was at 20,000 people.
Right.
And there weren't that many people left. There was a big mess to be cleared up. And it wasn't a pretty image at the end. There was a lot of cleanup, and the folks were not given the appropriate time
to clean up after themselves,
to get everything cleaned up.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you had 400 people trying to clean up the mess of 20,000 people that had been buried in ice. And so, the image looked bad. So it was really easy to take that picture and say, hey, they're not even taking care of their own land. That was the trope and the thing that was sent out. That was the image that people who did not know the story saw. And some folks that I saw there were like, this is really sad to see this end, to see this coming to an end. And for me, it felt like the metaphor of the fruit. In the summertime, Standing Rock was flowering. There was all this love and goodwill and coming together and healing. And then the fruit was, in my opinion, the fact that the message was able to leave that place. Because so many hip people come. That was a story that could have easily just never been known, because not many people go to that neck of the woods to have even known what was going on. And so the water protectors raised a voice, and the entire world heard it. And the closing of that camp, to me, was the flower that had shriveled and fallen off, but the fruit was growing. And that's what I see you talking about. The fruit has been growing.